I was for several years involved in higher education in the US, but hung up my hat in the last couple of years to spend some time in Hungary, primarily in the foreign policy field and international affairs, but also in some of their educational initiatives, which I will describe. But when I got this topic, I was reminded of the first time that I heard about Hungary's efforts to reshape higher education, and this took me back to the year 2017. And just to check my memory, I was able to successfully pull this up on the NPR website as well. But in April of 2017, I remember I was driving around in South Bend, Indiana, listening to NPR when it was still even vaguely listenable back in those days. And there was a story called Soros-Founded Graduate School in Hungary Threatened with Closure. And I think the word based had not yet taken off, but in my own mental retelling of this story, that was my reaction. But what I really remember, and this I have verified just now, Robert Siegel, the NPR interviewer, was talking to Michael Ignatieff, the president, and the conclusion of the interview, Siegel says, "That's Michael Ignatieff, president and director of the Central European University in Budapest, and we should say that NPR receives funding from the George Soros Open Society Foundations." And that was just kind of left there at the end of the report. So that led me to think that maybe I hadn't gotten the full story of what was going on in Hungarian higher education. But I'll tell you a few of the things that I've learned and that could be relevant just for thinking about the issue of higher education and education in general. And I think that the lesson that I'm going for here, or the idea that I'm going for here, is that the challenges facing any educational system are in fact very particular. So although Hungary is a conservative, anti-woke country, that's not the exclusive purpose of the educational system, much as we might like to think that it is. But instead, the chief purpose of education, at least from a political context or from a political perspective, is to contribute to the preservation of the political society and the nation and the regime in the broad sense. So education has a strong overall purpose to give society all of the things that it needs in order to preserve itself and to extend its life through time, you could say, and to equip the citizens of that country with what they need to be good and positive participants in society. So it's easy to see from that perspective how weaponized our current educational system, particularly in the West and the United States, has become in the opposite direction. What is the situation of higher education in Hungary, and what has changed in it in the last few years? I'm not going to give anything like a comprehensive overview. I just want to point out one or two major facts in particular. First of all, as you would expect in any European country, the educational system in Hungary and the system of higher education is quite ancient. The oldest universities date back to the 14th century, and there was a flourishing university world in the centuries after that, and particularly dating from the early modern period. But there were a number of events that transpired in the 20th century that left the Hungarian higher education system in a devastated state, and that was chiefly the advent of the socialist system and the Soviet and communist repurposing of education for very, very narrow and technical ends. So what you have to do is imagine a country whose elite was basically destroyed, and whose educational system and architecture, what had been left of it, after an already difficult first half of the 20th century, what it was repurposed for, namely this very narrow-minded, centralized, highly technical oriented education. So this is a country whose elite was destroyed, whose educational system was totally changed for a very bad political purpose on the basis of a bad system. And it wasn't rebuilt at any point during that 40-year rule. And then after the change to a democratic political system at the end of the Cold War, there were a subsequent couple of decades of mostly socialist rule where, again, nothing really happened to successfully rebuild this educational system. So the goals, you could say, of the rebuilding of Hungarian education are, first of all, to enhance the quality of the education because it had become quite degraded under the socialist times, and to bring it closer to Western European and American standards as well, at least in the true sense, but also to ensure a more patriotic or broadly patriotic higher education, and to foster the conditions that would enable a good and patriotic elite, if we want to use that word, but highly educated, talented group of people to contribute to the life of their country. So how did the Soviets destroy what was good? Well, one thing that they did was establish a slew of highly specialized universities reflecting this very narrow technical mindset. The universities contained such wonderful names as the University of Light Industry, the University of Heavy Chemical Industry, the University of Heavy Industry, different from Heavy Chemical Industry, University of Civil Engineering, University of Transportation, College of Communication. We can all agree that should be abolished everywhere, and other such things. So they literally took big universities with long, hundreds of years traditions and put them on the chopping block, dividing them up into extremely highly specialized universities. So universities and colleges did the education, and then the research was handled through the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, which oversaw research and PhDs. So a lot of the effort has simply been to righting the wrongs that occurred during this period. During the first Orbán government between 1998 and 2002, a lot of the old technical universities were merged into larger universities that were teaching at least, maybe not every subject, but a broader set of the subjects. But the model under which the universities had been governed, again, it's not very interesting to go into the details, but basically had also been part of this highly centralized and administered system in which no one really had in which the participants in the university life didn't really have ownership of or participation in or a stake in the direction of their university. So in the last few years, although again this has been highly criticized by National Public Radio, which receives money from the George Soros Open Society Foundations, there has been a model change in the Hungarian university system, basically to introduce something like boards of directors. Again, when this system change was undertaken, part of the idea was also that the boards of directors of these universities, again, this was a new innovation or new setup, again on more Western lines, ought to reflect the good goals that a university system should have, so as to forestall the situation that has already been described as having happened in the US, namely when these boards of directors become completely alienated from the interests of society and the voters and public education whose interests and instincts are more normal than those of elite academics. So that is kind of what happened in the setup of the Hungarian university system. But there are a couple of other interesting elements, I think, that are different from the American system. First of all, there was the creation of a university. This is under the Orban government in 2012, the creation of a university whose goal is to produce public administrators. So I think that this is probably something we can agree has not been a principal goal of the conservative movement in its own educational activities in the US. Most schools of public administration, most of the foreign service type schools, most of the schools oriented toward government aren't producing conservatives and aren't designed to. But we all saw what problem that led to in 2016 and 2017 when at the beginning of the first Trump administration there was a lack of people who were able to participate in a aligned way in the Trump administration. So in 2012 in Hungary, and I guess this was in the third year of the second Orban government, the National University of Public Service was brought into being out of the merger of a number of other institutions. And it's a school of 6,000 students that is exclusively oriented toward forming and training public servants in a very reliable, high caliber, and broadly patriotic way. So this university includes military officer training, law enforcement officer training, and the training of public administrative officials. And you know, for a long time, again, I'm not sure how that would come into existence suddenly in the U.S. in a conservative way. Obviously, the scale and nature of the Hungarian political system and country and educational system are all different. Nevertheless, what I would point out as significant is the mindset that has gone into introducing these educational changes or new educational initiatives. You know, for many, many decades in the U.S., conservatives were basically checked out of the process of producing administrators for government, either at the state or federal level. And, you know, although there are some inherent characteristics of administration maybe that make it disliked by conservatives, certainly we only have ourselves to blame if we're in a situation like we were in 2017 when we look around and there is no one like us who is able to participate in the act of government. So obviously the many efforts on a small and medium scale in Washington to correct that have been extremely important. But if we ever did have in the US, if we had and were able to exercise power for a sustained period of time, thinking of more substantive ways to increase the attractiveness of participation in government service and increasing the educational opportunities that are directed in that way from a conservative standpoint would be extremely important. Finally, well, Hungary needed a new elite because its previous one prior to the Soviets had been destroyed or kicked out or moved away and had to be rebuilt in such a way that there could be a group of people who were not just patriotic, but also highly skilled, highly talented, eager to stay and to participate in building up the nation. So some of you have heard of the Matthias Corvinus Collegium. There are a lot of MCC students here. It's the first institution that I met in Hungary. And it's basically, I have always described it to Americans as a residential ISI on steroids. So it's a highly selective extracurricular college to which any student in the country basically can apply at all different stages of their educational path, from grade school to middle school to high school to the university program to PhD and beyond. And it has a network of campuses all over the country, and it has a broadly values-based orientation, giving students supplementary education, bringing them to conferences like this, basically doing from a broadly more conservative standpoint everything that the thousands of left liberal institutions of a similar variety do. So you know, it was often the case in Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of communism, and in many countries in Central and Eastern Europe, it's still the case today, that if you want access to a high quality education, if you want access to the supplementary activities that make you part of an international network, if you want to attend cool international conferences, get fellowships, travel abroad, the only option for doing that is joining one of the many tentacles of the Open Society foundations that are, operating in a town or city near you. So the idea behind the MCC in Hungary is to provide a conservative alternative to that. So thank you very much. That is the substance of my perfectly timed remarks.